The Eclipse. It is one of the most infamous and disturbing events in all of manga, occurring in Berserk during the Golden Age arc. It marks a violent turning point in the series where the tone shifts from dark medieval fantasy into full-blown cosmic horror. The event begins when Griffith, once a noble and ambitious leader of the Band of the Hawk, sacrifices his friends and comrades to ascend to godhood. And don't get it wrong, this moment is not sudden, it's the culmination of his downfall after being tortured, broken and stripped of his power and pride. Once Griffith activates the Behelit, a mysterious demonic artifact, he is transported along with his army to a different plane of existence. There, they are greeted by the God Hand, a group of eldritch demonic entities who offer Griffith a chance to fulfill his destiny, but at a cost. The price is the lives of his loyal followers, who believed in him and followed him through war and hardship. And he agrees, marking each of them with a brand of sacrifice, condemning them to be haunted and killed by demons in the hellish dimension. And then the apostles, powerful grotesque demons, once humans, who sacrificed someone they loved in exchange for immense strange and monstrous forms by making a pact with the God Hand through a Behelit, descend upon the Band of the Hawk, brutally tearing them apart. It's not just the violence that makes this so horrific, but the sheer betrayal. These were comrades, friends, or even lovers, now reduced to screams and blood in an inescapable hell. For Guts and Casca, the only survivors, the experience is even worse. Guts watches helplessly as Casca is raped by the now transformed Griffith, who has become Femto, one of the God Hand. This event breaks the idea of loyalty, honor and hope. Griffith sacrifices everything for power, even his own humanity, and Guts loses his friends, comrades, arm, eye, and the person he loves. Casca loses her mind from the trauma, and the scene is drawn with graphic, brutal detail to show the raw evil of this choice and the emotional cost of ambition without limits. In the aftermath, Berserk becomes a completely different story. The Eclipse redefines Guts as a warrior and a survivor, forever marked, haunted and driven by rage and vengeance. So the Eclipse is considered one of the darkest moments in all of fiction, not just for its gore, but for its emotional devastation and betrayal. The death of Gwen Stacy. This event occurs in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 121 in 1973, and it is widely considered the moment when superhero comics lost their innocence. Gwen was Peter Parker's first true love, not a side character or a damsel in distress, but someone who genuinely planned a future with. So her death was unthinkable at the time, especially in an era where heroes always save the day. Readers were shocked to see a character so central to Spider-Man's emotional life be suddenly and violently killed. So the tragedy unfolds when the Green Goblin, aka Norman Osborn, kidnaps Gwen and takes her to the top of the George Washington Bridge. During the confrontation, he throws Gwen off the bridge, and Spider-Man quickly reacts, firing a web to catch her mid-fall. The webbing successfully catches her, but when Peter pulls her up, he finds that Gwen is already dead. In the panel, there's a small snap sound effect next to her neck, leading many to believe that it was Peter's web that accidentally broke her neck due to the sudden stop. Others argue she may have already been dead when she was thrown. Regardless, Peter blames himself, and this event shatters him emotionally, and marks a point where he realizes that power doesn't guarantee happy endings, even with the best intentions. And this event was a huge moment for comics as a whole. Up until then, superheroes didn't often fail. It signaled the end of the Silver Age of comics, and the start of a darker, more emotionally complex era. Some readers never forgave the creative team, but others recognized the bold storytelling choice for what it was, a turning point in how comics approached death and consequence. In the years that followed, Gwen's death continued to haunt Peter. It shaped his relationship with Mary Jane, his outlook as a hero, and his guilt-driven need to protect others. Unlike many comic deaths, hers wasn't undone by resurrection or time travel, it remained permanent for decades. The Red Wedding. The event takes place during the War of the Five Kings, when Robb Stark, king in the north, seeks to solidify alliances after breaking a marriage pact with House Frey. To mend relations, Robb arranges for his uncle Edmure Tully to marry a Frey daughter at the Twins, the Frey's ancestral seat. What appears to be a political reconciliation soon becomes a slaughter. As the wedding festivities begin, the music changes, the doors are barred, and what followed was one of the most shocking plot twists in the entirety of Game of Thrones. Without warning, the Freys, in league with the Boltons and under the quiet blessing of House Lannister, massacred the Starks and their bannermen in cold blood. Robb Stark is stabbed and killed. His mother, Catelyn Stark, watches in horror and desperation, begging for mercy, only to have her throat slit after witnessing her son's death. Even Robb's direwolf, Grey Wind, is shot and killed, and then placed in Robb's head. And one other thing, in Westeros, the tradition of guest right is ancient and sacred. Once you share bread and salt with a host, you are under their protection. The Frey's decision to carry out this massacre under the guise of hospitality is not only a political move, it's an act of spiritual blasphemy. It tells the audience that in this world, not even honor, tradition, or family loyalty are safe. The Red Wedding was especially shocking to viewers of the HBO series because it came without warning. There were no final words, no heroic last stands, only betrayal, confusion, and sudden death. For many fans, it felt like the death of hope in the story. Robb, seen as a potential hero and avenger of Ned Stark, is cut down mid-arc. It subverted traditional fantasy expectations, where noble characters usually triumph in the end. In the aftermath, the North is left leaderless, House Stark is shattered, and the psychological impact on readers and viewers is enormous. It proved that George R.R. Martin was willing to destroy main characters mercilessly, regardless of narrative comfort. And because of that, The Red Wedding became a cultural landmark, with its episode The Reigns of Castamere standing at a near-perfect rating of 9.9 in IMDb. The Ohara Incident. This tragic event happened in One Piece, during Nico Robin's backstory. It took place on the island of Ohara, home to some of the world's most brilliant archaeologists, including Robin's mother, Nico Olvia. These scholars sought to uncover the truth behind the mysterious Void Century, the lost era of history that the world government had deliberately erased. Their research centered around the poneglyphs, ancient stone tablets that contain forbidden knowledge, including the location of the ultimate weapon Pluton. When the world government discovered the Ohara scholars were closer to uncovering the secrets of the Void Century, they responded with an unforgiving invasion. Despite the scholars' purely academic intentions, the government labeled them as a threat to the world's stability and dispatched a Buster Call, a military protocol involving a fleet of battleships sent to completely annihilate an island. The island's entire population, including innocent civilians and children, were wiped out to silence the truth. So the world government, an institution that claims to maintain peace, reveals its true nature: paranoid, authoritarian, and willing to commit genocide to preserve its lies. Survivors of Ohara were given no chance to plead their case. Even Professor Clover, the lead archaeologist, is gunned down mid-sentence as he tries to explain the scholar's motivations. The emotional core of the incident lies in the experience of young Nico Robin, who is just a child when her world is destroyed. Branded a demon and a threat, she becomes the sole survivor, fleeing from island to island, hunted by the government with an enormous bounty on her head. Her desperate cry of "I want to live" years later, when the Straw Hat crew accepts her, is a direct echo of the trauma she endured at Ohara. So this incident represents one of One Piece's most powerful themes: the oppression of truth and the fear of knowledge. It's a warning about how far those in power will go to control history. For a series often known for its humor and adventure, this moment stands out as a harsh, emotional gut punch that adds depth to both the story's world and to Robin as a character. The third impact. It's the apocalyptic climax of Neon Genesis Evangelion, a cataclysmic event that threatens to erase individuality and human consciousness as we know it. Set in motion by Seely and Gendo Ikari through conflicting plans, the third impact is essentially the merging of all human souls into a single collective being. This process, called instrumentality, is presented as a way to eliminate human suffering, loneliness, and emotional pain by erasing the boundaries between individuals. The event begins when Shinji Ikari, emotionally broken and vulnerable, becomes the trigger. After merging with the Evangelion Unit 01, which has reached a godlike state, Shinji is given control over instrumentality, a choice to either accept the merging of humanity into one soul or reject it. The imagery during the third impact is surreal and disturbing. Giant ray-like figures, disintegrating bodies, oceans of blood, and visions of all of Shinji's trauma, desires, and fears. It's not just an apocalypse in the physical sense, it's an emotional and existential collapse. The characters are forced to confront their own insecurities, traumas, and suppressed emotions. The lines between reality and the mind blur, and for a brief moment, all of humanity becomes one, a world without rejection, but also without identity, freedom, or love. Shinji ultimately rejects instrumentality, deciding that even though life is painful and people hurt each other, the beauty of human connection is worth the risk, and this choice reserves the third impact, returning everyone to their individual forms, though not all may come back. The movie ends ambiguously, with Shinji waking up beside Asuka in a ruined world, choking her then stopping. It's a metaphor for depression, identity, and the struggle to accept oneself and others. And to this day, it's still one of the most philosophically complex, memorable, and emotionally harrowing events in all of anime. Order 66. It is a secret command that leads to the systematic execution of the Jedi Order across the galaxy. It takes place in Star Wars Revenge of the Sith and marks the point where Chancellor Palpatine, aka Darth Sidious, reveals himself as the Sith Lord and initiates his final move to seize total power. With the words "Execute Order 66", clone troopers who had fought side by side with Jedi for years suddenly turn on their commanders and massacre them without hesitation. The Jedi, once guardians of peace, are eliminated in a matter of minutes across multiple planets. Scenes showing beloved Jedi being gunned down by the very soldiers they trusted. And these aren't dramatic duels, they are executions, orchestrated by a plan decades in the making. Even younglings in the Jedi Temple are not spared, killed by Anakin Skywalker, now fully transformed into Darth Vader. The Jedi in Star Wars lore represented wisdom, tradition, and moral balance in the galaxy, so their extermination isn't just physical, it's also symbolic. It signals the end of the Republic, the rise of the Empire, and the collapse of everything the Jedi stood for. Order 66 also carries deep psychological weight in the Star Wars canon. For survivors like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, it marks a traumatic loss of comrades, students, and the way of life. For fans, it recontextualizes much of the prequel trilogy and adds emotional complexity to the original trilogy, especially the redemption of Vader. It also sets the stage for later stories like the Clone Wars, Rebels, and the Bad Batch, which explore the individual impact of Order 66 on both Jedi and clones. In many ways, Order 66 is the Star Wars version of a mythic fall, a moment when a great civilization collapses from within. It's the emotional death of an entire era. It resonates with people, and we still see versions of it to this day, in games, shows, etc. It is not just a Star Wars event, it is the Star Wars event that changed everything. Joker's madness. The Joker's attack on Barbra Gordon and Sarah Essen is depicted across two separate but thematically linked storylines, with the most infamous being the Killing Joke in 1988 by Alan Moore. In this graphic novel, the Joker arrives at Barbra Gordon's apartment and shoots her point blank in the spine, paralyzing her instantly. He then strips her and takes nude photographs of her bleeding and in pain, not for lust but to mentally torture her father, Commissioner Jim Gordon. Barbra survives but is left paralyzed from the waist down, forced to give up her life as Batgirl. The Joker's goal is to prove a philosophical point that anyone can go insane after one bad day. He uses Barbara's suffering to try to drive Jim Gordon mad, placing him in a freak show horror ride filled with images of his brutalized daughter. Years later, in No Man's Land in 1999, the Joker commits another deeply personal atrocity. He murders Sarah Essen, Commissioner Gordon's wife. So during a standoff in a ruined Gotham City, Sarah finds the Joker holding a group of kidnapped babies. She hesitates for just a moment, and Joker takes the opportunity to shoot her head, dropping her body beside the infants. These acts are not just random violence, they are targeted emotional warfare. The Joker doesn't kill for profit or power, he kills to hurt people in the most personal ways possible. Barbara loses her independence and identity, and Jim Gordon loses the love of his life. Unlike the Joker's typical mass chaos, these are intimate tragedies designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. Together, these moments highlight the Joker's role as a force of pure chaos. He wants to break people, piece by piece. His actions against Barbara and Sarah remain two of the most disturbing in Batman's history, cementing the Joker as one of the most terrifying characters in all of fiction. Room 101. It appears toward the end of George Orwell's 1984 and represents the ultimate instrument of control in the totalitarian regime of Big Brother. It is a psychological weapon, tailored to each individual's worst personal fear. For one prisoner, it might be spiders, for another, suffocating isolation, but for the protagonist Winston Smith, it is rats. Whatever form it takes, Room 101 is designed to destroy the last remnant of resistance within a person, not just in behavior but in belief. Winston's journey to Room 101 begins long before he is taken there. Throughout the novel, he secretly rebels against the party. He writes in a forbidden diary, falls in love with Julia, and dreams of revolution. He even believes he has joined an underground resistance called the Brotherhood, but his rebellion is short-lived. He and Julia are arrested in their secret hideout, betrayed by Mr. Sharrington, an agent of the Thought Police. They are taken to the Ministry of Love, which, in Orwellian fashion, is a place of brutal torture and psychological reprogramming. There, Winston is interrogated and mentally broken by O'Brien, a high-ranking party member who had posed as an ally. O'Brien doesn't simply inflict physical pain, he works to reshape Winston's perception of reality. Winston is forced to accept something like 2 + 2 = 5, renounce objective truth, and abandon his convictions. He endures weeks of torture, gradually giving up piece after piece of himself. Yet, even after all this, he holds on to one final act of defiance, his love for Julia. That's when he's taken to Room 101, the final stage of his reprogramming. There, Winston is trapped into a chair and shown a cage full of hungry rats. O'Brien explains that the rats will be released onto Winston's face unless he complies. In a moment of sheer terror, Winston breaks. He screams, "Do it to her, not me," betraying Julia to save himself. And this isn't just about survival. This is what the party has been waiting for. The betrayal of love, loyalty, and identity. Afterward, Winston is released back into society, but he is no longer the same man. Emotionally hollowed out, he no longer loves Julia, he no longer believes in freedom of truth or resistance. And in the novel's chilling final scene, he sits quietly in a cafe, watches the telescreen, and thinks he loved Big Brother. That's the true horror of Room 101. Not death, but complete psychological conquest.